So there are risks associated with these kinds of projects, that the projects fail or don't meet expectations, and that debtors, like Kenya, for example, have to pay high interest or principal payments, which undermine economic development and represent what some people refer to as social surplus extraction. There's a risk that politicians take out loans to boost short-term economic growth, with the view to getting re-elected, and the standard gauge railway in Kenya was inaugurated coming up to an election. There's potential for corruption around contracts, and again, the standard gauge railway in Kenya, there's been many corruption scandals around that. So that these loans are entered into for short-term political gain, rather than for the public good, if you like. There have been cases where debtors have defaulted, and that could put pressure on the Chinese financial system. Or in other cases where debtors have defaulted, sometimes the loans are securitized against assets like electrical grids or ports. There is a famous case in Sri Lanka of Hambantota port, which some people argue was repossessed by a Chinese company. A Chinese company has recently taken over the Laotian electrical grid, for example, but those kinds of situations are relatively rare. There's a risk that these projects are environmentally destructive, that they displace local people and livelihoods, and that they are environmentally intensive, that they use a lot of resources and contribute to the global environmental crisis, which we should be trying to resolve. China has a stated policy of non-interference in other countries' domestic affairs, but there's a risk also that Chinese actors can become entangled in contentious domestic politics, and that can result in what some people refer to as backlash or blowback, the unintended consequences of a policy or action. And lastly, that damage is done to China's international reputation as a responsible power, potentially undermining its soft power and its ability to change the international system in ways which are favorable to it. So if we're thinking about economic impacts, the economists of the world talk about something called the rate of return. And the rate of return is basically the profit in percentage that you make once you've accounted for interest payments and you've adjusted for inflation. And economists, when you do that, talk about an external rate of return. That means what's the kind of profit rate on an investment when you've adjusted by those factors. So if there's a high external rate of return, it may be a good investment from a business or individual perspective, but maybe not from a social or environmental perspective. They also talk about something called the social rate of return, or social return on investment. And that is that it may make sense to build roads, even if the road doesn't make a profit. If it helps your economy overall, it increases efficiency, it raises the overall rate of economic growth, and then the government can benefit from that through enhanced tax revenues, reduced unemployment, and reduced welfare payments, for example. So where there are these kinds of effects, it still may make sense, even if it's not profitable, the individual project, from a narrowly kind of business perspective. Now, if you look at some of the Belt and Road projects around the world, some of them are heavily loss-making, and this is in common with many loans in China domestically as well. So, for example, the Kara Balta oil refinery in Kyrgyzstan, which is Chinese funded and costs about $350 million US, only operates at 6% of capacity. So there's no way a project can be profitable or worthwhile when it's only working at 6% of its intended capacity or output. There have been huge losses on the standard gauge railway, and a few months ago the Kenya Railway Authority announced it wouldn't be able to pay the management fees to the Chinese company which is operating the standard gauge railway on its behalf in Kenya. So there are huge problems with that, and there are many, many other projects that have run into difficulty as well. But of course, governments still have to repay the debt unless they can get extensions or debt relief or write-offs. Now, the impacts of infrastructural investment vary by geographic context. So if you have a highly productive economic structure like Italy, which is part of the Belt and Road Initiative, you may generate a high social rate of return. But if you have an extractive style economy where raw materials are exported in exchange for manufactured goods, which is characteristic of most African economic structures, for example, then it may reinforce that kind of extractivist dynamic, and so not be very beneficial from an economic point of view, particularly if there are huge debts associated with it. So that is just a little overview of that paper. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm hoping to get it published, and if you would like a copy, please feel free to email me at carmodyp@tcd.ie. Thank you. Hello, my name is Pádraig Carmody, and I'm a professor in geography at Trinity College Dublin. I'm going to be talking to you today about a paper I'm working on called Highway to the Danger Zone, Geopolitics of the Distribution of Risk in China's Belt and Road Initiative. So just to give you a little bit of background, this will be a short presentation, but to give you a little bit of background, there's a Chinese proverb which says, if you want to be rich, build roads first. Now, according to some academics, we're living in a so-called no-go world. This is Ruben Anderson's idea from the University of Oxford, that the rich countries of the world, the United States, Europe, Japan, are increasingly retracting from their engagements overseas. And by the same token, people migrate